Hello and welcome to the Kscope podcast. Billy Reeves here, bringing out the big guns in this episode. The singer of one of the UK's biggest progressive metal bands, TesseracT, Daniel Tompkins, talking about his side project, White Moth Black Butterfly. News of Lunatic Soul, the side project of Marius Dudin from Riverside, one of the biggest metal bands in Europe. Snippets from the Progressive Music Awards Album of the Year, The Optimist by Anathema, and news of Anathema's Daniel Kavanagh's new album Monochrome, and an exclusive interview with the band who invented kosmiche, a Tangerine Dream. Well, before we hear from Daniel Tompkins and Jordan Turner of White Moth Black Butterfly, here's a track from their album. It's the title track. It's called Atone, out on Kscope right now.
Like the scent of a rose, you come and go, and you bring me hope before I take the blow, and I can find nothing that will bind you. There's always mystery to hide you. I'm feeding the shadow that's beside you, and I can find nothing that will bind you. Come and go, the trick is to own. You're taking life, you're taking hope. Fast or slow, there's nowhere to go. That's where the flashback starts, the flashback grows.
Like the sun on the stone, it comes and goes, and with the warmth of hope, I'm leaving to atone. I can find nothing that will bind you. There's always mystery to hide you. I'm feeding the shadow that's beside you, and I can find nothing that will bind you. Come and go, the trick is to own. You're taking life, you're taking hope. Fast or slow, there's nowhere to go. That's where the flashback starts, the flashback grows.
White Moth Black Butterfly, that's called Atone, from the album of the same name, which is out now on Kscope. The singer, Daniel Tompkins of Kscope act TesseracT and of Sky Harbour, plus a couple of chums. The main songwriter of Sky Harbour, a string arranger who's worked with the likes of Devin Townsend, and Jordan Turner, Daniel Tompkins' fellow Mansfieldonian. I'll let Daniel explain who's who.
Randy Slaw and Keshav Dar. Keshav lives in India and Randy lives in Utah. He recorded strings for the last Sky Harbour album. And, well, it turned out that he was an amazing songwriter. Invited him into the project.
Jordan, we're in Utah, we're in the subcontinent, but we're also in Mansfield, which is where you come in. So how did you two hook up musically?
Yeah, well, I met Dan through church, and then asked me to be part of the first album, just to sing on a few songs. So then he asked me to feature heavily in the project from then on.
Are you a singer for hire? Because that's quite a rare thing these days, isn't it?
I do hire my voice out a little bit here and there, and that is actually out of necessity at times. It's the nature of being a young underground band and trying to find a way to sustain that lifestyle. Because when I joined TesseracT, I was actually in the police force, and I always wanted to be a singer. It was very, very strange for me because, like, growing up, I didn't have the qualifications to go to university. I didn't know how to. I mean, being up here in Mansfield is quite out of the way. It's not, if you want to be.
It's not a rock and roll town.
It's not, no. I mean, it used to have a little bit of a scene, but it was never amazing. And I think a lot of people got trapped in, staying locally and not branching out enough or networking. And I thought, I've really got to push myself out. I had lessons. I went on, when MySpace was a thing, I was actively searching for bands that needed singers and having auditions for different bands. I didn't know any other way to do it other than to be in a band. And that's where it all started. But the thing is that when I joined TesseracT for the first place, that was a massive shock to me financially, because I'd kind of grown up with a fiancé, we'd got a house, and all the financial commitments you'd expect to come with that. And I suddenly realised that I'd thrown myself into a situation that I couldn't ultimately handle. The first time we went to the States, for example, we went away for, I think it was just short of 8 weeks, and we came back with a bit of pocket money. And, it was a real slog, in a van together, driving hotels every night or motels, and it was hard work. And it got to like the third tour, and you ask yourself the question, like, how is this sustainable? So what I actually do is I started to teach singing.
Okay.
And slowly over the years I've grown it into a business, and that is the other half of me, I guess. Now I teach singing, and I'm probably one of a few commercial coaches that are actively touring and actually living the life of a singer.
Well, I guess also that means you've got credibility as a teacher, isn't it? Because they do say, like, the anti-intellectual, like my dad, for example, would say, if you can't do it, you teach. Whereas you do both. Has he taught you anything, Jordan? What are the top tips that he's given you?
Wow, Dan has taught me a heck of a lot. From the get-go, I didn't even realise that the voice was an instrument as such. For me, it was just singing. And the main tip for me is learning about the head voice, chest voice, because for me, I'm a really soft singer, and I mainly access my head voice. I didn't even know that there was a whole other chest voice that existed until Dan showed me that I needed to find that. So that's been really helpful, just trying to get myself to sound a bit more powerful when the song needs you to go.
But by the same token, I guess you don't want to learn to do it correctly. If you've got something that's innate, there's a thin line, isn't there? If you're being taught how to do something properly, sometimes you can lose. There's a difference between a vocalist and a singer. I guess.
Like you had the first time I heard her sing, she had the most amazing timbre, and the tone and the softness and purity in the voice was absolutely stunning. And I was always wanted to work with her in some way. And then getting into the studio is a whole different matter, because obviously in front of a condenser, you're picking up all different nuances in the voice, and we discovered some really cool parts to your voice. You don't want to become trapped and almost be a one-trick pony. You need to have access to every aspect of your voice to get the most out of it.
So most people will see it. It's probably fair to say that most people will see this as a Dan Tompkins solo record outside of the TesseracT, something that you're providing your own. So it's very generous of you to have basically almost half of it sung by someone else, isn't it?
I love Jordan to bits. She's a really good friend, and I wanted to give her a platform as much as what I have, because I really value her talent. And she hasn't had the break or the opportunity to go out there and actually be on a record and live the life of a singer.
Bruised but forgiven. You talk like the world is against you. You pull yourself to pieces, but I'm never getting over you.
of just having really strong melodies that could carry and didn't necessarily need loads of tracks to be able to build it up, and kind of to rely on the melody rather than all the other things behind that. So there are parts where we wanted to create those layers just to bring a little bit of extra something out of the song, but we're just really focusing on creating beautiful melodies, I guess.
I think that comes through.
Yeah.
That kind of comes through as well with my production limited skills. That you can actually do some pretty amazing things with one lead vocal.
Very much so. No, I totally agree. That's what the sequencing is interesting, I think, because it kind of starts off gently, sort of like warms you in, and then almost suddenly there's a kind of mid-period where some of the organic Eastern instruments come in, and there's one song which is essentially one note, which brilliantly is called Symmetry, I believe.
Oh, Symmetry, yeah. This a really cool story to that song is that I've also involved a lady called Amanda Munton, who's a contemporary classical vocalist, operatic in terms of the classical sense of it.
Pops up at the
That's
end?
Amanda,
Right.
and Amanda is someone that's helped me out quite a lot in terms of developing myself as a vocal coach, because she lectures and teaches from the University of New Hampshire in the States as well. And I discovered her because she's a contemporary classical singer.
Okay.
And that's very strange. If you know anything about vocal technique, you don't mesh the two. If you're a traditional singer, you normally stay within that world. You don't branch out because there are a lot of hard and fast rules that you need to adhere to. So contemporary thinking being mixed with traditional singing is quite odd, and I was intrigued by that. Ultimately, she got involved in that song, and Evelyn as well, and we just thought we'd throw absolutely everything at that song. And we even tried doing Tibetan kind of like chanting.
Now there's a certain Eastern sort of D major drone.
Yeah, and lots of because we're quite into pop music as well, and this is definitely a progression from the first album in terms of accessibility.
What's actually the hardest word to sing? Is it going? In the rock and roll canon, is it going? Is it gone? What's the hardest word to sing? Obviously, if you take a word outside the rock and roll lexicon, barbecue is going to be quite difficult to fit into a song. But within the rock and roll lexicon, why is going the hardest word to sing?
I don't know, actually. That's a really good question. Now, I teach diction in singing, and I understand now that actually there should be no difficult words to sing.
Okay.
It's all about modulation and cleverly shaping the vowels or consonants within a word to make it easier for you to sing. So it really is just about using good embouchure and placing that tone just right.
Okay, so
depending on where you're in range.
So I'm gonna
give you a word.
I'm gonna make you a star. David Essex, come here. We gonna make you a star. Because I'm going to make you a star.
Yeah.
That's another weird thing though, because when I started, I don't think this is the same for you, but I used to listen to loads of American rock bands, post-rock, hardcore, and I actually developed an American accent in my own voice at a young age, at the start of my kind of like journey.
Yeah, because you don't do that now.
No, not at all. No, and the first band that I actually joined was a band called Piano. And they were studying at university in Nottingham I think I was about 21 at the time, and they were the first people to pick me up on it. How do you say the word bus?
Yeah.
And I was like, bus. I said, well, sing it. Bus. I was like,
It's
all
a word from
right.
the rock and roll lexicon,
Not bus.
Well, there's plenty of buses in rock and roll.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's because the American English is the lingua franca of rock and roll, isn't it? Well, because the Americans invented, apart from pop music, then kind of adding the art school and adding the kind of vaudeville to it, the musical to it, what the British did. I mean, the Americans have invented everything else. What's the most difficult word to sing then? On this album, flashback is quite a difficult word to sing, which you have to sing on this.
Yeah.
That's not in the rock and roll lexicon.
I don't know for me whether it's more words, whether coming back to the accent thing.
Okay.
I find that harder than the words itself in terms of accepting my own accent in the songs. Because Dan, I understand now why you encouraged me to just go for it now, but I would listen back and I'd be like, oh, the Derbyshire accent really comes through there, and it's not the most
it's
beautiful.
nice though, it's good,
but you always just go with it. It's like
No, there's very few people.
So.
I guess that's why Mick Jagger, of course, can do all the American accents, wasn't it? It was said. Whereas Robbie Williams, he sounds like, to the Americans, like Dick Van Dyke sounds to us, because he can't do an American accent. He's doing that kind of mid-Atlantic thing. So, okay, so give me a lesson. Dan, right? What's the first thing I need to do? How do you keep, if you're touring America, right? How do you look out? Firstly, how do you look after the old pipes? Then, what are the exercises? The old tone of breath.
One of the first things I would say is that there are no remedies. There are no real like old wives' tales that
prevention
work,
is better than cure.
It is, yeah. I think with a lot of people, they have little things that they do, like honey and manuka honey and peppermint teas. The voice is incredibly subjective to the individual. So in actual fact, what may work for you might not work for me. So it is very much about finding something that works for you. So there may well be a little trick that might work for you, but not for me. So vocal silence is massively important in maintaining a good voice. Also hydration, like we should be taking like 3 litres a day for like an average size male, for example, depending on your climate, where you live, humidity, age, levels of personal fitness, loads of factors. So yeah, you've got to search for what works for you, and it's a lot about trial and error. But in essence, to keep a good voice, vocal silence whenever you can adopt it. High protein diet, because you're using vocal muscles.
I can't keep quiet all day.
No. It's all right. That's fine.
I can't rest the voice.
Do you know what?
High protein diet, yeah, I can do that.
Stretching your vocal cords from top to bottom in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening is massively important, because for endurance in singing, it's not just about breathing, it's not just about being healthy, it's about developing strong vocal muscles, and there are two groups. You have a CT muscle and a TA muscle.
Right.
And if you can stretch your cords out from the bottom of your range to the top in a sweep, like a...
Go on then. My tinnitus.
Right, all you're doing is grabbing hold of them.
Do that again.
You're grabbing hold of them and you're making them pliable and stretching them. So if you do that daily, you're building new habits, new muscular habits. And if you can have a high protein diet, you're rebuilding muscle tissue to coordinate in a certain way. That's how you strengthen your voice.
Are you absolutely paranoid, though? When you're going to America with TesseracT in the next few weeks and Europe, aren't you absolutely paranoid? Stay away from me. Do you know what? Say that cough, keep that cough away from me.
A little bit, yeah. You do have to kind of like be clever.
You can change a guitar string, but you can't change
no, you can't. You have to be clever. If there's somebody coughing, I walk the other way. If somebody shakes my hand and they've got a sweaty hand, I'm afraid I'm going to wash it.
Fist bump. Fist bump. Just fist bump. That's my topic. Yeah. So, I think that probably concludes our business. Thank you very much for the tea, but obviously no milk in it. Why shouldn't I have milk in it?
Well, dairy products aren't good for your voice, are they?
Chocolates, I understand.
Your time is abiding. This mirror image
White Moth Black Butterfly. That's called Evelyn. Before that you heard The Tempest. Those songs work as a duopoly. There's a connectivity between them reflected in the videos to both of them, which you can find on the Kscope channels, filmed in the Trossachs and near Loch Lomond. And before that you heard the title track, Atone, White Moth Black Butterfly. The album's called Atone and it's out now. And my thanks to Daniel and Jordan for their hospitality. Right, some oral notices from the Kscope stable. Anathema, Album of the Year at the Progressive Music Awards. Daniel Kavanagh from Anathema launches a new solo album shortly. And Lunatic Soul, the brainchild of Riverside's Marius Duda, have announced their new album and video. Let's start with the new video for Can't Let Go from the Album of the Year at the Progressive Music Awards, The Optimist by Anathema. Let's hear a bit. Anathema, Can't Let Go from The Optimist at the Progressive Music Awards Album of the Year. My hearty congratulations. The UK and European leg of the mega tour starts this week in Glasgow, 48 dates, and then the band are in Australia in December. And Daniel Kavanagh from Anathema has released a track from his forthcoming solo album. It's called Monochrome. It's out on the 13th of October. The track is called The Exorcist, and you can see the video for this up on the Kscope channels. Let's hear a bit.
Do you trust in who I am? Do you believe in where I stand? Do you trust in who I am? Do you believe in where I stand? 'Cause you save me from myself. Yes, you save me from myself. 'Cause you save me from myself. Yes, you save me from myself.
Daniel Kavanagh from Monochrome. Artwork for that, incredible portraiture from one of the country's leading fine artists, Danny Branscombe. Now, Marius Duda has announced his new album as Lunatic Soul, out on the 6th of October on Kscope. There's a video for this track up on the Kscope channels. This is called Anymore. Let's hear a bit.
Don't talk to me anymore. Wanna share my innermost desire.
Lunatic Soul, Anymore from the forthcoming Kscope album, Fractured, which is coming out on the 6th of October. And you can see the video for that up on the Kscope channels right now, directed by the good folk at Sightsphere. Now, everyone at Kscope is extremely proud to be releasing the new studio album from one of the most important bands there's ever been, Tangerine Dream. The album is called Quantum Gate. It's coming out on September the 29th to coincide and celebrate the band's 50th anniversary. Now, Edgar Froese is no longer with us. He passed away in 2015, but he left instructions and hard drives behind for Thorsten Quaeschning, Ulrich Schnauss and Hoshiko Yamane to create more music under the Tangerine Dream banner. Before we hear from Thorsten and Ulrich, let's hear a track from Tangerine Dream's a new LP. This is called Tear Down the Grey Skies.
I'm Thorsten Quaeschning, composer and synthesizer, sometimes electric guitars on Tangerine Dream.
My name is Ulrich Schnauss, or as people in this country prefer to say, Ulrich Schnauss. I play synthesizer as well.
Thorsten, first question to you, if I may. This record has had an unusual and strange creative process, gestation and birth. Can you put it into words as how it came about?
Edgar decided to renew the lineup with Ulrich and skip some of the other live people like saxophone and percussion and guitars, and to come back to kind of sequencer-driven and a more pure electronic music. And so he invited Ulrich to join us, and he called this phase of the band Quantum Years. So there was one album in November 2014 called Malacunia, and then we played in a tour in Australia in the four-piece with Edgar, Hoshiko, Ulrich and me. And sadly he died in January 2015, and as part of his wishes and he already did many sketches, arrangements, recordings, and on the most the biggest part were concepts. We spoke a lot of times about how we should make music in the future of Tangerine Dream, and how album and live performances should happen. And he left us a bunch of sketches, many hard disks, and and because it was Edgar's wish, there was kind of no decision to do it or not. So, but it's kind of an order to fulfill the vision of his Quantum Years concept.
And as you know, as Germans, we very much like following orders.
Yeah.
So, we didn't hesitate a second.
But Ulrich, this has been tinged by a huge amount of emotion. So, you know, how, as well as, you know, playing synthesizers and sending wavs backwards and forwards, it's a much bigger deal than that. You know, how does emotion get in the way in this situation?
I would say it really depends on the respective situation as well. I have to say I felt very emotional, particularly when we started working on the record, because we actually did that in Austria in Edgar's studio, because just as Thorsten said, we had to understand Edgar's filing system as well, which wasn't that easy, because it was like literally, I'm not exaggerating, like 15 hard drives spread out on the floor of the studio, and most of the arrangements you could only load successfully if all of those drives were connected. Crikey. And it was all like scattered around. And for me it was very emotional, because I was doing most of the stuff that I was doing like in a smaller studio that is sort of separate room next door. And the funny thing was, I mean, I don't want to sound too hippy-dippy or anything, but when I was doing that, I sometimes felt like as if Edgar was around, and I actually got so into it that I sometimes felt like, this is great. I'm going to open the door and go into the main studio and maybe play Edgar that, and then obviously realizing that is for very obvious reasons, not possible.
Yeah, if a human being, if a soul is an electrical impulse in the brain, then literally what Edgar left behind was electrical impulses via the hard drives. I can imagine. Thorsten, I want to ask you something I've always wanted to ask you guys, is that this slightly ugly phrase krautrock. Okay. Now, the dear sainted David Stubbs, who wrote, I think, the tome on the subject, Future Days, he prefers, as do I, kosmiche. And there's a strange kind of, over the last sort of 20, maybe 25 years, it's become hugely hip. I think there's probably in Britain a kind of Premier League of Kraftwerk, obviously, Cannes, Neu, Tangerine Dream cluster, perhaps, so the kind of Division 1, and you've got kind of, maybe Amundul, Popol Vuh. But it's odd that there's certain groups, like Tangerine Dream, that are considered really hip outside of Germany, and there's certain groups from the period who aren't. Can you put your finger on that? Why is that kind of abstract German music of the time sounds just so hip nowadays?
So I think every movement has a counter movement. Like later on in the 70s, with progressive rock, leads to punk, leads to the plastic-esque sound pop of the 80s, leads to grunge, leads to techno, maybe leads to hip-hop, something like this, or that. So I think it's the free form of playing and not trying to copy bands from the States or England, maybe because they can't play like them, was the idea as a counter movement to the folk, Schlager, and very soft pop German music of the 60s, would be my opinion. So there was the idea to make an own music, like a new music in a country which was occupied with very, very poppy, trashy sounds. Not trashy, but at least cheesy sounds. And so they were maybe longing for a new form of music.
Yeah, how much does politics play? This is a question for you, Thorsten, a question for both of you maybe, but how much does, politics play a part in that? Because we're talking the spirit of, Tangerine Dream goes back to that kind of spirit of 68, and as you say, kind of like trying to rid, Germany maybe of its bourgeois background and of its occupation of the Americans. How much did politics play a part in it, Thorsten, do you think?
I think there was no chance to uncouple with politics in end of the 60s in Germany, or especially in Berlin, or like Neu in Düsseldorf. I think we had no chance to have no opinion on things, and that was a kind of a natural thing, I guess. But so to come, but I don't answer a question. The thing is, maybe the crowd or psychedelic or kosmische Musik thing is now kind of hip because of some of the music which happens in the 2000s to 2010, the first decade, maybe.
Yeah, I think while it is impossible to ignore that cultural developments are different in different countries, different areas. I think we shouldn't nationalize music too much, because obviously the beautiful thing about popular culture in general is that it is so international and actually at best ignores any kind of boundaries, no? Whether they're ethnic, religious, gender, or any of that kind of nonsense. However, like I said, as I just acknowledged, of course, you can trace the development of certain pop cultural movements down to specific social constitutions. And one thing I would say about the reception of krautrock and all that German stuff, and probably also why it is popular and hip here, is that I had a very rosy-eyed view on British culture and society before I moved here, and I've never regretted moving. But also, I can see sort of like both sides of it now, because what I do think is, what I do appreciate about the situation here is that there is like a never-ending hunger, thirst and desire for new and different things. And when something is different, it actually is being appreciated here. While like in a lot of post-fascist, post-totalitarian societies, such as Germany, for instance, if you are different, that's a problem, because you're expected to blend in with the mainstream society, essentially. However, like I said, after living here for 12 years now, I also have to say, and I hope this is not too provocative, I think there is a bit of a almost like, if I wanted to be polemic, I would say like a colonialist sort of notion here in the UK, in the way that you are very, I mean, not you personally, but you as a representative for the British public here, you know, you are very interested in these external cultural influences, whether it's Bollywood or krautrock or whatever, but it's more like it's like an accessoire that's being attached onto stuff without actually being too interested in what the real situation in those countries is. I mean, krautrock was a reaction against German mainstream society, and it was linked to that political movement, which was like an even more harsh reaction against German mainstream on a more political end. And this kind of notion that you have here, like there was a BBC documentary on krautrock called The Rebirth of Germany or something like that. I think that's actually, to be honest with you, that's very disrespectful to people like Edgar or Kraftwerk or whatever, because what they did was courageous and brave, because it was actually their farewell and goodbye to Germany, but their intention certainly wasn't like to present like a marketable brand of German pop culture that would sort of redress Germany as a crazy, open-minded, great place, which it really wasn't. I mean, that one of a quote that I'm always use, the famous German writer Heinrich Böll aimed that at the political situation, that it was a situation of a war of 6 against 60 million, you know, and that's like a much more accurate representation of the whole krautrock subculture phenomenon. But I
think it's beautifully put. Out of all of the tracks, Ulrich has spoken about that very eloquently, is how Edgar had left things. Out of all the tracks, then, what was the one that actually came together really easily? What was the good child?
There was lots of really great stuff, and tons of very, very Edgar-esque chord structures and his kind of using scales, and it remains Edgar's style.
There's one track that I'm particularly excited, or maybe even a little bit nervous about, to find out what people's reaction is going to be, because we took the liberty of putting one track on the album that it does not involve Edgar, but is like a joint thing that we wrote, and it has the wonderful title, When Everyone's Dancing, It's Time to Leave, that Thorsten came up with, and which is certainly a motto I do agree with very, very much, especially in my late age.
I'll tell you what, it'd make a great slogan on a T-shirt. There's merchandising opportunities there, I think.
I'm going to wear that one. Yeah. Just send me your PayPal ID, please. Yeah.
Now, final question for you then, Thorsten, because we must wrap it up. It's a short question, which probably has a long answer. What next?
We
breakfast?
Breakfast. No, that's
after breakfast. What happens with Tangerine Dream?
Yes. So I'm 1 hour behind London, so it's 30:30. Okay.
On rock and roll time, it's dawn over there.
Yeah, you're a musician.
What happens next with Tangerine Dream, Thorsten?
Okay, so we're playing a couple of concerts starting next month in the Netherlands. We're playing 2 concerts there. Then in February we play the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg. It's already sold out. Then there are a few concerts in the pipeline for March and May in Germany, and hopefully we're playing whole of Europe and maybe States soon. There's enough music. Tangerine Dream is more than an idea than a band, and could last for more than 100 years.
Fantastic. Is there anything you want to say to Ulrich then while you've got him here?
No, we're gonna meet for rehearsals mid of October. And
he's aware of that. Are you aware of that?
Yeah. I'm quite efficient, you know.
My thanks to Thorsten Quaeschning and Ulrich Schnauss from Tangerine Dream. The album Quantum Gate is out on September the 29th. I'm going to play out with the track that they mentioned there, It Is Time to Leave, when everyone is dancing. Thanks to Ulrich and Christina for helping pull that interview together. Thanks to you for your time. My name's Billy Reeves, and I'll speak to you again on the next Kscope podcast. Ta-ta.